Your bacon is a lie you paid for willingly. 6 days back you brought it home, convinced by words like artisan and premium stamped across the label. Now the edges have faded to an ugly gray. When you peel away the packaging, a sharp acidic odor hits your nostrils, part vinegar, part laboratory. Come day 7, a slick coating forms over the surface, and into the garbage it goes. That's $10 evaporated. Now let's reverse time to 1547. An Austrian villager killed a hog, covered the meat in nothing but rock salt and beach smoke, then suspended it inside a cellar carved from stone. 16 months forward, his household consumed that pork on Easter morning. Not only was it perfectly preserved, the flavor had deepened into something no fresh cut could rival. What ancient knowledge did this farmer possess with only primitive tools that your climate-controlled grocery chain with all its scientists has chosen to bury? We're about to expose what happens when you combine salt, smoke, and wild thyme in ways that refrigeration and vacuum sealing can never replicate. And the reason billion-dollar food conglomerates pray you never discover these methods. Grab any bacon sitting in your supermarket cooler and examine what's actually listed in the ingredients. You'll find water printed right there, not the natural moisture meat contains, but deliberately added liquid. Factory processors pierce your bacon using automated equipment lined with scores of hollow needles. The industry calls this improvement, but the accurate term is deception. Modern commercial bacon can hold between 15 and 25% injected liquid. You're spending meat money on municipal tap water blended with phosphate chemicals and sodium. When you pay $10 for that package, 2 of those dollars bought you nothing but H2O. American households collectively waste $2 billion annually purchasing rebranded water disguised as protein. But that injected moisture isn't merely draining your wallet, it's destroying your food's ability to survive. Water activity is the technical phrase scientists use for measuring how much moisture microorganisms can access. Distilled water registers at 1.0 on the scale. Raw unprocessed meat hovers near 0.98. Bacteria flourish in this range. Salmonella colonies refuse to expand below 0.95. E. coli shuts down at 0.95. Listeria monocytogenes, the pathogen responsible for 60 American deaths yearly, requires at least 0.92. Your contemporary bacon, flooded with profit-driven water injection, measures between 0.96 and 0.97. It's essentially a microbial resort wrapped in cellophane. Compare that to medieval-style bacon. Following weeks of salt penetration and smoke exposure, the reading drops to somewhere between 0.85 and 0.88. At those levels, biological activity ceases entirely. Bacteria cannot reproduce. Mold cannot establish colonies. Yeast finds no foothold. The meat transforms into an environment chemically opposed to decomposition. Refrigeration becomes unnecessary because microorganisms have nothing left to consume. Now here's the disturbing part. That injected solution isn't pure water. It contains sodium phosphate compounds designed to force muscle tissue to swell and trap additional fluid. Watch what occurs when you cook factory bacon. A white froth erupts across your skillet. That's the added water escaping, dragging dissolved proteins along with it. The strips contract, sometimes losing 30% of their volume. You're not preparing bacon. You're boiling chemically altered meat in its own industrial bath. The industry has understood this reality since the 1950s when mechanical injection became widespread practice. Before that transformation, bacon underwent traditional curing, rubbed with dry salt, rested for weeks, then smoked. The process removed 25% of the weight through dehydration. That weight reduction meant financial loss. So corporations engineered a method to not just prevent the loss, but actually add weight back into the product. They converted an ancient preservation technique into a profit extraction system, and public health became collateral damage. But here's what should genuinely enrage you. They market this wet, injected, bacteria-friendly product using words like natural and traditional. Some labels declare uncured in bold letters. They substitute celery powder for sodium nitrite and advertise it as healthier and more authentic. It's pure manipulation. Celery powder is simply concentrated nitrate extracted from vegetables. When bacteria inside the meat convert those nitrates into nitrites, your body processes the identical chemical compound. The only difference exists on the marketing label and the inflated price. You're paying $3 more per pound for linguistic tricks. The medieval farmer never injected his meat with water. He executed the exact opposite strategy. He extracted every molecule of moisture, transforming the flesh into something capable of surviving winter sieges and ocean crossings. His meat existed as food engineered for endurance. Yours exists as food engineered for obsolescence. Let's return to that Alpine smokehouse, because what transpired inside that timber structure over 6 weeks wasn't primitive guesswork. It was sophisticated chemical warfare waged with understanding of preservation physics. The process initiated the same day the hog was butchered. The farmer sectioned the carcass into substantial cuts, hams, belly slabs, shoulder pieces. Within hours, while the tissue retained warmth, he packed every surface with pure coarse-grained salt pressed into every crevice. The objective wasn't seasoning, but biological combat. Salt functions as a weapon system. When you bury meat beneath salt, osmotic pressure begins instantly. Water trapped inside muscle cells gets pulled toward the concentrated salt crystals coating the exterior. The cells collapse inward. The liquid that seeps out carries blood cells, bacteria, and nutrients that microorganisms require for survival. Across the following 7 days, the meat would surrender 15% of its mass, entirely water draining into the salt bed below. But here's the brilliance. Medieval butchers didn't apply salt just once. After 1 week elapsed, they scraped away the wet, blood-stained salt and applied fresh, dry crystals. Then they repeated the process. By the third salting cycle, the meat had become rigid, dark crimson, and dry when touched. If you measured water activity at that stage, it would register around 0.92, low enough to halt most bacterial growth, but not quite sufficient for complete safety. That's where smoke entered the equation. The smokehouse was constructed from stone or aged timber with a fire pit positioned away from the hanging meat by either a long flue or underground tunnel. The smoke reaching the suspended cuts remained cold, staying below 30 degrees Celsius. This temperature control was absolutely critical. Hot smoke would sear the outer layers, creating a hardened crust that sealed moisture inside. Cold smoke achieved the reverse effect. It dehydrated the meat gradually while depositing an invisible army of preservative compounds across every exposed surface. Wood smoke contains over 200 distinct chemical compounds. The most significant are phenolic molecules and organic acids. Phenols originate from lignin, the rigid polymer providing wood its structural strength. When wood combusts at low temperatures, lignin molecules fracture and release chemicals like guaiacol and syringol. These phenolic compounds act as disinfectants. They penetrate the meat's surface layers and eliminate bacteria through direct contact. They also prevent fat molecules from oxidizing, which is why smoked meat never develops that rancid, spoiled stench even after months of storage. The organic acids, primarily acetic acid and propionic acid, execute something even more sophisticated. They lower the pH level of the meat's exterior to approximately 5.0. Bacteria cannot function in acidic environments. But here's the strategic brilliance. These acid molecules aren't large enough to remain on the surface. They're microscopic. They slip through bacterial cell walls and infiltrate the interior. Once inside, where the pH remains neutral, the acid molecule dissociates and floods the cell with hydrogen ions. The bacteria must consume all available energy attempting to pump these ions back outside. It exhausts its resources and dies. The smoke doesn't merely coat the meat. It converts the meat into a lethal trap. Following 6 weeks of exposure, the ham was removed from the smokehouse. It had become rigid, nearly black across the exterior, and had lost between 25 and 30% of its original weight. It carried the aroma of burning wood and mineral salt. The farmer wrapped it in woven cloth, suspended it inside a cool, dry cellar, and left it undisturbed. 12 months later, when he carved into that ham, the interior revealed deep red coloration, firm texture, and complete safety achieved using only salt, smoke, and time. This was an exceptional practice. German monasteries maintained written records documenting hams stored for 18 months without any degradation. Ships traversing the Atlantic during the 1600s transported barrels of salted pork that remained edible throughout 6-month voyages, with zero refrigeration. In 1841, a food inspector working in Belfast examined hams imported from Westphalia, Germany. His official report stated that after 12 months in dry cellar storage, they demonstrated superior flavor and preservation compared to any locally produced product. The technique succeeded because it honored the biology of decay. It didn't attempt to deceive bacteria with synthetic additives. It eliminated what bacteria needed for survival: available water, oxygen access, and neutral pH levels. It constructed a fortress built from salt and smoke compounds. And once that fortress reached completion, the meat became impenetrable. Now let's examine why this worked at the molecular level most consumers never see: the actual chemistry. Bacteria require three fundamental elements to reproduce: nutrients, moisture, and suitable environmental conditions. Medieval preservation attacked all three simultaneously. Let's begin with moisture. Scientists label this water activity, written as lowercase a followed by subscript W. It's a measurement scale from 0 to 1. Pure water scores 1.0. Fresh, unprocessed meat registers 0.98. This number reveals how much water remains available for bacterial consumption. When you introduce salt to meat, something occurs that most people fundamentally misunderstand. The salt doesn't sit passively on the surface. It dissolves into the water present inside the meat and separates into sodium ions and chloride ions. These ions attract water molecules and lock them into position. The water still exists physically, but it's no longer accessible. Bacteria cannot utilize it. Think of it this way. Imagine a room filled with empty chairs. If the chairs sit vacant, people can occupy them. But if every chair has a coat draped across it, the room appears full but remains useless. Salt ions function as those coats. They occupy the water molecules. When you force water activity below 0.95, you've covered enough chairs that most bacteria cannot find anywhere to establish themselves. They starve from dehydration. But medieval bacon didn't stop at 0.95. It descended to 0.85 or lower. At that measurement, even the most resilient bacteria like Staphylococcus aureus can barely maintain basic functions. Mold cannot even begin colonization until you reach 0.80. The meat becomes a biological wasteland. Now introduce the smoke element. When wood burns slowly without producing flames, it doesn't just generate pleasant flavors. It generates active chemistry. One of the key reactions is called pyrolysis. That's the term for when heat decomposes the wood structure without combustion. Lignin, the compound that makes wood rigid, breaks down into smaller molecular fragments. These fragments are phenolic compounds. Phenols are identical chemicals used in antiseptic mouthwash and hospital-grade disinfectants. When phenolic smoke contacts the meat's surface, these molecules don't simply bounce away. They adhere. They react with surface proteins and form a thin protective layer called a pellicle. This pellicle functions like molecular shrink wrap. It seals in the remaining moisture and blocks out oxygen and airborne microorganisms. But the phenols also penetrate inside the meat. They migrate through muscle fibers and attach to fat molecules. Fat normally undergoes rancidity when it reacts with atmospheric oxygen. The phenols interrupt this oxidation reaction. That's why a 2-year-old ham doesn't emit the stench of rotten lipids. The smoke neutralized the chemistry of decay before it could initiate. The third defensive layer is pH manipulation. The organic acids present in smoke, mostly acetic acid, which is chemically identical to vinegar, reduce the surface pH of the meat to around 5.0 or lower. This matters tremendously because bacteria operate within a comfort zone. Most pathogens prefer pH levels between 6.5 and 7.5, close to neutral. When you drop the pH to 5.0, their enzymes cease functioning properly. Their cell membranes suffer damage. But here's the part that makes it absolutely lethal. Those acid molecules are extremely small. They penetrate through the bacterial cell wall like it doesn't exist. Once inside, they break apart and release hydrogen ions. The interior of the bacterial cell becomes flooded with acid. The bacteria exhausts all its energy attempting to pump the acid back outside. It eventually exhausts itself and dies. This is called the hurdle effect in food science. Each preservation method creates a barrier. Salt creates one barrier. Smoke creates another. Dehydration creates a third. Individually, Each barrier might slow bacterial growth. Combined together, they create an impenetrable wall that nothing can cross. Medieval meat didn't just resist decay. It became chemically programmed to destroy anything attempting to spoil it. Your modern bacon contains none of these protective systems. The 15% added water keeps the water activity dangerously elevated. The liquid smoke flavoring is sprayed superficially for taste, not preservation. There's no pellicle formation, no phenolic barrier, no pH shift. The meat remains soft, wet, and welcoming to microbial colonization. The only thing standing between your bacon and complete putrefaction is a 40-degree refrigerator and a plastic barrier. Cut the electrical power for 12 hours, and your $10 package transforms into a biohazard. So if the ancient method was superior, safer, longer-lasting, and more resilient, why did we abandon it? 3 reasons: speed, cost, and the cold chain infrastructure. After World War II ended, America needed to feed an exploding population. Meat processors wanted to move product rapidly. Traditional curing required 6 to 8 weeks. Dry salting, slow smoking, and careful storage was too time-consuming for industrial-scale operations. So during the 1950s, engineers invented brine injection technology. Instead of waiting for salt to diffuse into the meat over weeks, they could force it inside using hollow needles in seconds. A machine equipped with 40 needles could inject an entire ham in under 60 seconds. But injection accomplished something else. It added weight. When you inject a salt water solution into meat tissue, the muscle fibers swell. They hold the liquid like a sponge absorbs water. A 10-pound ham could become 11 or 12 pounds overnight. The processor didn't lose 25% to dehydration. They gained 15% in added water weight. Every pound of water sold at meat prices was pure profit margin. The industry embraced it enthusiastically, and consumers didn't notice initially. The meat looked plump and fresh. It was only when you cooked it that the truth literally poured out. That white liquid flooding into your pan isn't fat. It's the injected water escaping mixed with dissolved proteins and phosphate compounds. You're watching your money evaporate in real time. Then there's the labeling deception. In the 1970s, consumers started worrying about nitrites. Studies linked them to cancer formation when cooked at high temperatures. The industry faced a problem. Nitrites prevent botulism and give bacon its pink color. Without them, bacon turns gray and becomes dangerous. So instead of removing nitrites, they found a regulatory loophole. Celery powder. Celery naturally contains elevated levels of nitrates. When you add celery powder to meat along with a bacterial starter culture, the bacteria convert the nitrates into nitrites. It's the exact same chemical compound, the exact same effect on your body. But because it originates from a vegetable, the USDA permits you to label it uncured and no nitrates added. Consumers see natural and pay $3 more per pound. The industry gets to continue using nitrites while charging a premium for concealing it. This is the modern food system. Optimize for profit extraction. Add water. Exploit loopholes. Market the illusion of tradition while doing the exact opposite. But there's a darker reason we abandoned the old ways. The cold chain. In the 1960s and 70s, refrigeration became cheap and universal. Every truck, every warehouse, every store had cooling systems. If you could keep meat cold from slaughter to table, you didn't need to preserve it. You could sell it wet, fresh, and profitable. Preservation became unnecessary. Except it wasn't unnecessary. It was insurance. Medieval people preserved meat because they had to survive winter, survive war, survive crop failures. Their food had to last. Our food only has to last until the next shopping trip. We traded resilience for convenience. And now, when the power goes out or the supply chain breaks, our food dies in days.